Chapter 4. Brian, 2 points plus 1 big point. I wait until after my karate class on Saturday to give my mother the note from Mr. Bigham. "Your father is going to have a fit," she says when she's read it. "But I can't begin to deal with this now. Go take care of your brother while I make dinner." I'm in the living room showing Tyson my new karate move, an uppercut punch to the jaw, when I hear my dad's pickup rumble into our driveway. A few minutes later, he's shaking the note from Mr. Bigham in my face and screaming at me. "Just look at this! You've been in school 1 week and you're already in trouble." "But I didn't do anything," I tell him. "Exactly what I was afraid of," he yells. "You didn't do anything. Let me see your notebook." He turns to my mother. "Haven't you been helping him with his homework?" "When?" she asks. "After I've made the dinner, washed the dishes, given Tyson his bath, done the laundry." "And what am I doing?" he yells. "Only working from sunup to sundown to support this family." "Oh yeah, well me too, Buster," she shouts back at him. "Have you forgotten that I work at the hospital all day?" I take Tyson by the hand and head out of the living room. I figure since they're fighting, maybe they'll forget about me. My father switches his glare from my mother to me and shouts, "Come back here! Where's that notebook?" I hate when my parents yell at me in front of Tyson. I don't want him to find out what a jerk I am. Tyson pulls on my hand and begs, "Karate! Play karate!" "And no more karate lessons," my father yells. "And no more hanging out with those good-for-nothing friends of yours." After dinner, he tells me, "Brian, there'll be no television for you tonight. You're hitting the books." That's exactly what I want to do with my school books. Hit them, tear them, burn them, destroy them. While my parents and Hillary are laughing at Saturday night sitcoms on TV, I'm in my room copying each of my spelling words 25 times. At 10 o'clock, my father comes in to check on my work and to test me. "We'll do this every night," he tells me. "I'm checking everything you do." He looks over what I've written so far. "Incredible," he says. "Just look at that." He points to where I printed INCERDIBLE and says, "It's cred, not curd. You misspelled it 25 times. How are you going to learn if you can't even copyright? And this handwriting, who can read it?" "I can," I say. He yells, "Don't get fresh." Then he tests me on all the spelling words except incredible. I get 2 right and 10 wrong. Later, as I'm falling asleep, I think, my father's an incredibly mean man, and I'm an incredibly stupid boy. I'm also incredibly surprised at our meeting with Mr. Bigham on Monday morning. After he shakes hands with my mother and father, he says, "I've asked you here to tell you how bright your son is and to discuss ways we can help him use his intelligence to improve in his schoolwork. Brian is a very smart young man." "Brian? Smart?" My father looks confused. "Me?" I say. "I've always told you he was smart," my mother tells my father. "I've always told you he was lazy," my father tells my mother. Are my parents going to start fighting and arguing in front of Mr. Bigham? "I don't think Brian has been lazy," Mr. Bigham says. "I think he's been discouraged." He looks at me. "I'll bet that at the beginning of this school term, you promised yourself you would do better in your schoolwork than you did last year, that you would work extra hard. I think you told yourself, 'I can do it.' Then, when you tried, all the letters got scrambled, so that you even misspelled your own name on the board. He looks right into my eyes, right into my brain. Is that what happened? Yes, I whisper. That's what happened. I said to myself, I can do it, but I couldn't. I knew then that Mr. Bigham is no ordinary person. In addition to being the strongest man in Sharon, or maybe in all of Connecticut, he's a mind reader. My father says, I don't understand how you can tell us Brian is smart if he has so much trouble with a simple thing like spelling. I tried helping him with his spelling this weekend. No matter how many times he wrote those words, he couldn't get them right. Mr. Bigham nods and says, I know that Brian has a lot of trouble with spelling, but there are different ways of being smart, and some very smart people have trouble with reading the letters of the alphabet and putting numbers in order. Brian is one of them. That's when Mr. Bigham says he's convinced that I have a learning difference called dyslexia, and explains that it's hard for people with dyslexia to learn to read and remember some kinds of things. Like the capitals of the states, I say, and the multiplication tables, even the 5 timeses. He smiles. That's right. That kind of memory work is very challenging for you. For other people, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. People like Isabel Morris, I say. Exactly. Mr. Bigham holds up my test papers. I see from testing Brian that he can understand really difficult ideas. And he thinks in interesting and creative ways. He looks at me as if I'm someone really special. Did you know, he asks, that the actors Tom Cruise and Cher are dyslexic? So were Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein, and Leonardo da Vinci. Like them, Brian, you have a great intuition. That means you can understand things without going through a lot of steps to get to the idea. You have an excellent mind. There are lots of things you will learn faster and understand better than people whose minds work in a more ordinary way. Mr. Bigham seems so impressed with my special brain that I don't have the heart to tell him I'd rather have a more ordinary one. One that wouldn't get me in trouble with my parents and that would get me good marks in school. He has all sorts of plans for me in my brain. First of all, he wants my parents to say it's okay for me to take more tests with a specialist to find out more about my learning differences and to make it official on my school records that I'm dyslexic. Next, he wants me to start going to the resource room during study period to get help with my homework. And I'm going to give you extra help too, he tells me. We'll find a way to get you over some of these reading problems. He looks me right in the eyeballs. You're going to have to work hard. Now that I know how interestingly your mind works, I'm going to expect a lot more from you in school. I want you to start making a real contribution to the class. And don't worry, I'll know what kind of questions to ask you. That's when my father says he will help me at home. Mr. Bigham reads my mind again and says that he thinks my father makes me nervous when he helps me, and asks if my mother could do it. I could help him if someone else did the dishes for a change, my mother tells my father. My father says doing the dishes is a lot easier than helping me with my homework. Mr. Bigham says that the best help would be if they could hire a tutor to work with me once or twice a week. My father says that we can't afford it, and that besides, it's up to the school to help me. That's what he pays taxes for. I'm embarrassed that he says that, but Mr. Bigham agrees with him. Both my parents say it's okay for me to take the special tests. Now tell me, Mr. Bigham says, what are some of the things that you like to do, Brian? What are you good at? My mother answers for me. Brian's good with his hands. He can design and build brilliantly, just like his father and grandfather. She tells him all about the fancy birdhouses I made with Grandpa Al when I was only 8, and how we sold them at the August craft fair on the town green. Mr. Bigham thinks that's a big deal. But he should be good at book learning, my father says. That's what we're here to talk about. And what about sports, Mr. Bigham asks. Physical activities. Soccer and swimming, my mother's answering for me again. But Mr. Bigham's looking right at me. Anything else? He asks. Karate, I answer. I'm a brown belt. A brown belt at your age, he says. That's pretty impressive. Listen to me, Brian. No matter how much extra work we load on you, be sure to leave time for building and karate. Promise me that, will you? I look at my dad. He shrugs and nods. I smile at Mr. Bigham and say, sure, why not? Later, at the beginning of recess, the Jokers Club beats the 7th graders to the soccer field. For a couple of minutes, we have the whole field to ourselves. You must be in big trouble with Mr. Bigham, John yells to me as we take, with Mr. Big. John yells to me as we take positions. I saw your mother and father in the hall. Dan throws me the ball. Maybe you better cool it on the big jokes, he says. I'm about to tell them that I'm not in trouble, but decide they probably aren't very interested in how smart I am. What would I say? Guess what? I really am Brian the Brain? They'd tease me for sure. None of us do good in school, which is part of why we're such good friends. Hey man, I say as I kick the ball to Richie, I can handle it. But I wonder, can I? That night, when I get in bed, I lay awake in the dark for a long time, thinking about the meeting with my parents and Mr. Bigham. He said I'm smart, that I'm a good thinker. I remember times in school when I knew the answer before the other kids, but just didn't say it out loud. And I remember the time during 5th grade science class when we studied how an internal combustion engine works. I knew how it worked as soon as I looked at the thing. I just couldn't have explained it to everyone else the way the teacher did. So no one knew I knew. But now, because of the test, Mr. Bigham knows I know how to think about a lot of things. For a while, I wonder what my friends would do if they found out I was smart. Would we still be friends? I fall asleep thinking about how neat it would be to get good grades, to be a good reader, and to know the answers in my class. More answers than even Isabel Morris. And how great it would be to learn anything I wanted to become anything I wanted to be. A doctor or a lawyer or a scientist who understands everything about the Canada goose. The next day, during first period science, Mr. Bigham announces a project that won't be due for months, but that we will start working on right away. It's an animal life project, he explains. Each of you is to pick an animal that you're interested in knowing more about. You will learn all that you can about the animal and report it to the class. Then he asks us what we think would be the best way to learn about an animal. Any ideas, Brian? He asks. He's surprised me, but I think for a moment about the Canada goose and say, watch them, see how they communicate with each other. Very good, Mr. Bigham says. He writes on the board, field study. Isabel raises her hand. Reading, she says. Mr. Bigham writes that on the board, while Isabel tells the class about all the research she would do by reading in books and magazines. She even says what part of the library she'll use. Mr. Bigham says that by the end of the day, we should each turn in a piece of paper with the name of the animal we will study on one side and our own name on the other. I already know my animal. Next period is journal writing. As we open our journals, Mr. Bigham reminds us, write whatever is on your mind. Maybe you want to write down some of the ideas you have about your animal life project for science. And if you have trouble with spelling or any of the mechanics of writing, don't worry about that during journal writing. Just get your ideas down in any form you can. He looks right at me. Understood? I nod. Then I write on the first page of my journal. Canada geese are smart. I don't know how they're smart. I just know they are. They have a way to live that is smart for them. I like them. I hear some honking over the school as I write this. They're going south for the winter. They have a good sense of direction. I have an awful sense of direction and don't know left from right sometimes. When I get older, I want to travel, but what if I get lost all the time? Okay, so I'm going to show you this page of the book. So this is Brian writing in his journal. And it's a little bit difficult to read because he did misspell some words. He did get some words wrong. He spelled the words the way he thought they should be written, which is okay, because that's what Mr. Bigham said during journal writing. You don't have to spell things right. He just wanted him to get his words or get their thoughts on paper. The next day, I spend the whole morning at the high school taking tests with Dr. Ruth Jenner, who knows all about dyslexia. It's a long time to be taking tests, but they're not as hard as I thought they'd be. When I meet up with the other jokers at lunch, I tell them I missed school because I had a doctor's appointment. That afternoon, Mr. Bigham says, "Resource room people, let's put a move on." Every day during study period, 3 of the kids in our class go to the resource room. Jae Kim, a Korean boy who doesn't know English very well, Jenny, who's deaf, and Leonard, who's not so smart since he hit his head in a bike accident. He wasn't wearing a helmet. I always wear my helmet when I ride my bike, but I still have to go to the resource room. I get up to follow the others out of the room. John looks pretty surprised when I pass his desk. I hunch over, walk with my feet pointed out like a duck, and pull a dumb-looking face. He thinks what I want him to think, that I'm making fun of going to the resource room. He laughs. Dan and Richie laugh too, and so do a few other kids. The Jokers Club members scratch their heads. Mr. Bigham doesn't laugh or say anything. He just looks at me and raises his right eyebrow. I stand up straight and leave the room as fast as I can without running. The resource room is smaller than a regular classroom, which is okay because there are only a few kids in there at a time. Ms. Crandall starts out by talking to each kid. When she gets to me, she asks what my biggest problem is with homework. Social studies, I tell her. She asks to see the notes I took in class that day. Right away, there's a big problem. Neither of us can read what I wrote. I can't listen and write at the same time, I tell her. A lot of people have that problem, she says. See me at the end of the session. I have something that will help you. When the bell rings and Jenny, Jay, and Leonard have left, Miss Crandall reaches into her desk drawer. This should help you with note-taking, she says. She pulls out a tape recorder and hands it to me. I stare at it. How's a tape recorder going to help? She explains that from now on, I'll sit in the first row in social studies class and record the part of class when everyone else is taking notes. That way, she and I can listen to the lecture later, and she'll help me write out my notes. At the bike rack after school, Dan marks down my 2 points plus 1 big point in the Operation JDBR scorebook. You're way ahead, John tells me. How do you do it? It's easy, I say. I'm just myself. I screw my body and face back into my idiot look and they all laugh again. Richie pats me on the back. Poor Toomey. You got to go to the retard room. John says, Hey dudes, let's go over to the hideout now. There's still some of those pretzels. We'll pick up sodas on the way. I can't, man, Dan tells him. I've got to go right home, my father said. Count me out, I say as I get on my bike. I got to do something for my mother. No way am I going to tell them that I couldn't go to the hideout after school because I have to go home and study. or that I have to use a tape recorder in Mr. Dither's class, social studies class, because I can't even copy notes off the board right. That's the end of chapter 4.